The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at exactly 8:47 a.m., wedged between automated security alerts and vendor spam. Subject line: Strategic Realignment Discussion, Thursday, 2 p.m. Mandatory attendance. From Jennifer Walsh, our new VP of Operations. The woman who'd been circling my department like a vulture for 3 months. My name is Alex Richardson. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 7 years, I've been the backbone of North Point Industries' entire manufacturing control system. Not that anyone in the C-suite understood what that meant. To them, I was just another expensive line item in the IT budget, a necessary evil they tolerated until they could find a cheaper alternative. But I'd seen this movie before. The warning signs had been accumulating for weeks, like storm clouds on the horizon. First, there were the efficiency consultants, prowling our facility, asking pointed questions about our legacy systems and redundant processes. Then came the budget meetings I was suddenly excluded from, followed by the arrival of fresh-faced contractors who spent their days shadowing my team and taking notes. The most telling sign? The phone call I'd overheard 3 weeks earlier. Jennifer Walsh, speaking to someone she clearly thought couldn't hear her through the thin conference room walls. The Richardson situation needs to be handled delicately. He's built everything from scratch, but we can't afford his salary anymore. Once we have his documentation, we can transition to offshore support. That night, I went home to my modest ranch house on the outskirts of town. I pulled out a bottle of bourbon I'd been saving for a special occasion. Sitting on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red, I made a decision. If they wanted to play hardball, I'd show them what a real curveball looked like. See, what Jennifer Walsh and her team of efficiency experts didn't know was that I wasn't just another employee who happened to be good with computers. I was the architect of something far more valuable than they realized. And I had a legal ace up my sleeve that they'd completely overlooked. 7 years ago, when North Point was hemorrhaging money due to constant production delays and quality control failures, I'd been brought in as a temporary contractor to fix their automation systems. What I found was a disaster. Outdated software, jury-rigged hardware, a manufacturing process that was one equipment failure away from complete shutdown. Instead of just patching their problems, I proposed something radical. A complete overhaul using my proprietary manufacturing execution system, called FlexCore. It was software I'd been developing in my spare time for years. A revolutionary approach to real-time production management that could adapt to any manufacturing environment. The negotiations had been tense. North Point needed my system desperately, but they didn't want to pay licensing fees. I was young, eager to prove myself, so we reached a compromise. I'd license FlexCore to North Point at a reduced rate in exchange for a permanent position and the opportunity to further develop the system using their facilities as a testing ground. The contract was carefully worded. FlexCore remained my intellectual property, licensed exclusively to North Point Industries for use in their manufacturing operations. The license was tied to my employment status, renewable annually at my discretion. If my employment was terminated, they had 90 days to negotiate a new licensing agreement or cease using the software. It seemed like a win-win at the time. North Point got cutting-edge technology at a fraction of market cost, and I got job security, plus the resources to perfect my creation. For 7 years, the system ran flawlessly. Production efficiency rose by 43%. Quality defects dropped by nearly 60%. But apparently, success breeds complacency. Jennifer Walsh and her team saw an expensive employee managing software they assumed belonged to the company. They never bothered to dig into the legal details of how that software had come to exist in the first place. Now, staring at Thursday's meeting invitation, I felt a familiar calm settle over me. The same focused clarity I'd experienced during my military service, when everything slowed down and the path forward became crystal clear. I opened my laptop and began making preparations. Thursday arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I walked into conference room B at exactly 2 p.m. The room had been chosen deliberately, the smallest conference space we had. No windows, uncomfortable chairs, a psychological power play designed to make me feel cornered and insignificant. Jennifer Walsh sat at the head of the scarred wooden table, flanked by Marcus Chen, our CEO, and two people I didn't recognize. One was a woman in her 40s, wearing an expensive suit and the kind of confident smile that screamed, "Management consultant." The other, a man about my age, casually dressed but alert, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "Alex, thank you for joining us," Jennifer began, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I'd like you to meet Rebecca Martinez from Operational Excellence Partners, and this is David Kim from TechFlow Solutions." I nodded politely, but remained standing. "What can I do for you?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We'd worked together for 7 years, shared late-night crisis calls, celebrated production milestones. Now, he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Rebecca Martinez leaned forward, consulting a tablet. "Alex, we've been conducting a comprehensive review of NorthPoint's operational structure. While your contributions have been valuable, we've identified opportunities for significant cost savings through strategic outsourcing." "Outsourcing," I repeated, flatly. "TechFlow specializes in manufacturing technology management," David Kim interjected smoothly. "We can provide the same level of service at 60% of current costs, while bringing fresh perspectives and modern methodologies." I almost laughed. Fresh perspectives, modern methodologies, corporate speak for, "We'll replace you with someone cheaper who doesn't understand what they're managing." "What's the timeline?" I asked. Jennifer looked relieved I wasn't arguing. 4 weeks for complete transition. We'll need comprehensive documentation of all systems and processes, of course. "Of course," I agreed. "And what about FlexCore?" The silence that followed was telling. David Kim glanced at Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca looked to Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer finally turned to Marcus. "FlexCore is part of our manufacturing infrastructure," Marcus said carefully. "It'll be included in the transition." I nodded slowly. "I see. Well, I'll certainly provide all the documentation you're entitled to." The phrasing made Jennifer's eyes narrow slightly, but she didn't pursue it. "Excellent. We appreciate your professionalism, Alex. This transition will position NorthPoint for future growth while optimizing our cost structure." More corporate speak. What she meant was, "We're firing you to boost quarterly profits, and we expect you to smile while we do it." After the meeting, I walked back to my office, a converted storage room in the basement of the main production facility. It wasn't glamorous, but it was private, and the constant hum of machinery above had always helped me think. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney, James Riley. We'd worked together on several patent applications over the years. He understood the technical aspects of my situation better than most lawyers. "They want a what?" James asked after I explained the meeting. "Outsource my position. Complete transition in 4 weeks. And they think FlexCore transfers with your job?" "Apparently." I could hear him typing on his keyboard. "Alex, I'm looking at your licensing agreement right now. This is either brilliant or incredibly naive, depending on your perspective." "Explain." "The license is crystal clear. FlexCore usage rights are tied to your employment status. If North Point terminates your position, they have 90 days to negotiate a new licensing agreement or cease using the software entirely. And if they refuse to negotiate, then they're in violation of intellectual property law. You could seek an injunction to shut down their operations until they comply." I felt a cold smile spread across my face. How long would that take? "In this jurisdiction, with clear contract language and documented violations? Days, not weeks." That evening, I drove out to Miller's Lake, a quiet spot about 20 minutes from town, a place I'd often gone to think during difficult periods. The water was mirror smooth, reflecting the last light of day, like polished steel. I thought about Marcus, who'd hired me straight out of the Army, given me my first real opportunity in the tech sector. About my team, Sarah, Mike, and Jennifer, not Walsh, a different Jennifer, who'd worked alongside me for years, learning the intricacies of FlexCore, becoming genuinely skilled at their jobs. They were all good people, caught in a bad situation. When the hammer fell, they'd suffer along with me. The guilt of that knowledge sat heavy in my chest. But then I thought about Jennifer Walsh and her efficiency experts, reducing 7 years of dedication and innovation to a line item on a spreadsheet. About David Kim and his promises of modern methodologies, when he'd probably never set foot on a production floor in his life. They'd made their choice. Now they'd live with the consequences. I pulled out my laptop and began drafting a very specific set of instructions. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of meetings, documentation sessions, and what appeared to be seamless cooperation. I played the part. The professional employee committed to a smooth transition. I answered David Kim's questions with patience and apparent candor. "The FlexCore architecture is quite sophisticated," I explained during one of our daily handover sessions. "The core processing engine handles real-time data from over 300 sensors across the production floor." David nodded, taking notes on his tablet. "And this all runs on the server cluster in the main data center?" "The primary systems, yes," I replied, "though there are distributed components throughout the facility." I pulled up a network diagram on my monitor. Each production line has local controllers that maintain autonomous operation even if they lose connection to the central system. Impressive redundancy. Rebecca Martinez noted from her corner of the room. She'd been sitting in on our sessions, presumably to ensure knowledge transfer was progressing. "Manufacturing can't afford downtime," I said with a small smile. FlexCore was designed with military-grade reliability standards. What I didn't mention was that those distributed components were more than just redundant controllers. They were authentication nodes, each one programmed to verify the legitimacy of the central FlexCore installation, every single day. If the central system couldn't provide valid licensing credentials, the entire network would gracefully shut down. It was a security feature I'd implemented years ago, ostensibly to prevent piracy. In practice, it was an insurance policy I'd hoped never to use. During the evenings, I worked on more covert preparations. I contacted 3 different employment attorneys, not because I planned to file a wrongful termination suit, but because I wanted multiple opinions on the strength of my position. All 3 reached the same conclusion. Your licensing agreement is ironclad. I also began networking quietly, reaching out to contacts in the industry, letting them know I'd soon be available for consulting work. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. FlexCore had made waves in manufacturing circles. Several companies were already interested in licensing it for their own operations. But the most important work happened in my home workshop, a converted 2-car garage where FlexCore had been born. The version running at North Point? It was 2 generations behind. While they'd been coasting on my innovation, I'd been building something better. I called it FlexCore 3.0, a leap forward. With machine learning for predictive maintenance, advanced quality control algorithms, and integration capabilities that would make it the gold standard for any modern manufacturing operation. It was my ticket to independence, assuming I could survive the confrontation that was coming. Then came Wednesday evening, the final week, and with it, an unexpected visitor. Marcus Chen stood on my front porch, looking older than his 52 years. "Can we talk?" he asked. I invited him in, poured 2 cups of coffee. We sat in the living room, surrounded by silence, until he finally spoke. "This isn't how I wanted things to go, Alex. But it's how they're going." He nodded slowly, staring into his cup. "The board's been pressuring me for cost cuts. Walsh convinced them that outsourcing IT operations could save us nearly $500,000 annually. And my track record didn't factor into that decision?" Marcus gave a bitter laugh. "Your track record is the problem. You've made everything run so smoothly they think anyone can manage it. They don't understand the complexity behind the simplicity." I felt a flicker of sympathy. Marcus was a good engineer, forced into a political role he never wanted. Now, the board pressure, the earnings calls, the never-ending demand for improved margins. It was slowly killing him. "What happens Monday?" I asked. "David Kim takes over. We announce the transition to the staff. TechFlow begins managing operations." "And FlexCore?" Marcus looked confused. "What about FlexCore? It's part of our infrastructure." I leaned forward, set down my cup. "Marcus, do you remember our licensing agreement from 7 years ago?" "Vaguely. Why?" "FlexCore isn't owned by North Point. It's licensed, contingent on my employment status." The color drained from his face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that, as of Monday at 5 p.m., when my employment officially ends, North Point no longer has legal authorization to use FlexCore." Silence. Long, cold silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "How long do we have to negotiate a new agreement?" 90 days. "And if we can't reach terms?" I met his eyes. "Then you shut down the system, or face legal action for intellectual property theft." He left shortly after that, walking to his car like a man carrying the weight of the world. I watched his taillights disappear down my street and wondered, would he warn the others? Or just hope the problem would somehow solve itself? Either way, it was too late for warnings. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. The kind of early autumn day that promised winter wasn't far behind. I dressed carefully. Dark slacks, white shirt, best tie. If this was going to be my final performance at North Point Industries, I intended to look the part. The all-hands meeting was set for 10 a.m. in the main break area on the production floor. The entire day shift was there. Supervisors from other shifts, too. Marcus stood at the front of the room, flanked by Jennifer Walsh and David Kim. Rebecca Martinez lingered in the background, watching the handoff like an insurance auditor at a failing bank. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, his voice missing its usual certainty. "As you know, North Point is committed to operational excellence and continuous improvement. Today marks an important milestone in that journey." I stood near the back, watched the faces of my colleagues, Sarah, Mike, Jennifer, faces tight with unease. They'd suspected this day would come. Knowing it doesn't make it easier. After 7 years of exceptional service, Alex Richardson will be transitioning to new opportunities. Marcus paused. David Kim, from TechFlow Solutions, will be taking over management of our manufacturing systems. A ripple went through the crowd, not the polite nods Walsh had anticipated. These weren't just employees. These were veterans of every late-night outage, every production miracle, every system save. They didn't just work with me. They trusted me. They knew that I wasn't just managing FlexCore. I was FlexCore. David Kim stepped forward, polished, smiling. "I'm excited to work with all of you. TechFlow brings modern methodologies and proven processes that will take North Point's operations to the next level." Corporate jargon, empty optimism. The room wasn't buying it. "Any questions?" Marcus asked. Silence. Then, Tom Bradley, senior supervisor, war-hardened, he raised a hand. "What happens if something goes wrong with FlexCore?" he asked. "Alex built that system from scratch. He's the only one who really understands it." David Kim didn't flinch. TechFlow has extensive experience with manufacturing execution systems. We'll have comprehensive documentation, full system access. Any issues can be resolved through our standard support protocols. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. He had no idea that FlexCore wasn't a set of procedures. It was an ecosystem, an organism. And he had just stepped into its nervous system with a butter knife. The rest of the day was quiet. I backed up my personal files, cleared out my desk, transferred final documentation. At 4:30 p.m., I took one last walk through the production floor. The machines hummed in harmony. Data flowed. Algorithms danced. Quality systems monitored every variable with clinical elegance. It was a symphony. My symphony. 7 years of perfection. At 5 p.m. sharp, I submitted my final timesheet, turned in my badge, returned my company laptop, and walked out of North Point Industries for the last time. The drive home took 15 minutes. 15 minutes of thinking, predicting. David Kim would spend the week feeling confident, reading documents, running diagnostics. TechFlow would begin their audits, their optimizations. Meanwhile, FlexCore would quietly keep doing its job, checking, verifying, authenticating every single day. Until Tuesday morning, when the authentication would fail. I pulled into my driveway, sat in silence as the sun dipped low and painted my house in golden light. I poured a bourbon, settled in, and waited. The call came at 7:23 a.m. "Alex, it's Marcus. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "FlexCore. The entire system shut down about an hour ago. Production is completely stopped." I took a sip of bourbon. Breakfast of champions, as my father used to say. "That's unfortunate. What's the error message?" "Something about license verification failure. David's team is working on it, but they're not making progress." I see. Well, you should probably contact FlexCore's licensing department, Silence. Then, FlexCore's licensing department? That would be me, Marcus. I'm a consultant now. 30 seconds of dead air. I could almost hear the exact moment when the implications landed. What do you want, Alex? A fair licensing agreement, one that reflects the actual value FlexCore provides to North Point. And if we can't reach terms, then you'll need to find an alternative manufacturing execution system. I hear there are a few on the market, though none quite as sophisticated. He knew it. I knew it. Switching systems would take months, cost millions. And North Point? North Point would bleed. Money, customers, credibility. Every single day. I need to talk to the board. Of course, you have my number when you're ready to negotiate. I hung up, refilled my coffee, leaned back in my chair. It was going to be an interesting day. By noon on Tuesday, I'd received 5 calls. Jennifer Walsh, David Kim, Rebecca Martinez, and 2 separate lawyers from North Point Industries. The progression of emotion was almost comical. Confusion, anger, denial, bargaining, grudging acceptance. They were in trouble, and they knew it. David Kim's call was a highlight. Alex, I need to understand what you've done to the system. Gone was the corporate confidence. Now it was panic, barely concealed behind a fragile voice. I haven't done anything to the system, I said. FlexCore is functioning exactly as designed. But it's showing a license error. We can't access the core functions. Correct. The software is no longer licensed for use by North Point Industries. He sputtered. That's impossible. This is our manufacturing system. And there it was, that entitled confusion that comes from mistaking possession for ownership. I explained it slowly. FlexCore is my intellectual property, licensed to North Point contingent on my employment. As of yesterday, I'm no longer employed. Therefore, the license is no longer valid. He tried again. We have documentation. We know how the system works. No, David. You have user manuals. You don't have source code. You don't have architecture diagrams. You don't have licensing keys. Documentation tells you what FlexCore does, not how it does it. Silence, followed by realization, followed by the cold thud of his credibility crashing into the floor. The lawyers were no better. They came armed with threats and legal posturing, sabotage, work for hire, economic terrorism. I listened, then referred them to James Riley, my attorney, a man currently living his best life defending a rock-solid legal position. By Wednesday morning, production had been down for over 24 hours. Marcus called at 6:30 a.m., his voice hollow and defeated. The board met last night. We're prepared to discuss terms. I'm listening. What do you want? I've been thinking about that. Revenge is a short game. Satisfaction burns quick and dies fast. I needed something bigger, longer term, transformational. 5-year licensing agreement for FlexCore, renewable at my discretion. License fee, $100,000 per month, with annual increases tied to production volume. Support and updates provided as an independent contractor at $600 per hour. Minimum 4 hours per month. Marcus was stunned. That's more than we were paying you annually. Yes, but it's less than you'll lose if production stays offline for another week. The board will never approve this. Then you'd better start shopping for a new MES. Maybe SAP. Implementation takes about 18 months. He knew, and I knew, they wouldn't survive 18 months. I need to take this back to the board. Of course. Oh, and Marcus, I've had some inquiries from your competitors about licensing FlexCore. Just thought you should know. The call came at 2:30 p.m. Jennifer Walsh. Flat, clipped tone, gritted teeth. We accept your terms, with modifications. I'm listening. 3-year agreement. $75,000 per month, scaling to $100,000, support at $400 an hour. I paused just long enough to sound like I was debating. Acceptable. With one addition, a non-compete clause. No development or licensing of competing systems during the contract. Agreed. One more thing, Jennifer. David Kim. I want him removed from anything involving FlexCore. A longer pause. Fine. He'll transition to other projects. By Thursday afternoon, the contracts were signed. FlexCore came back online, like it had been waiting. The system ran with near mythical precision, as if eager to prove just how indispensable it was. That evening, I returned to North Point one last time, to oversee the restart, to reclaim the floor I'd once commanded as an employee, but now on my own terms. Sarah approached me, uncertain but hopeful. Alex, what happens to us now? What do you mean? The team. Are we still going to be working together? I smiled. The first real smile in weeks. Sarah, how would you feel about joining my consulting practice? I'll need people who understand FlexCore, and I can offer more than TechFlow ever will. Her relief was instant. Are you serious? Dead serious. We're going to build something bigger than just North Point. By the end of the evening, I'd spoken to Mike, and Jennifer, and a few others. I wasn't just leaving with leverage. I was leaving with a team. Richardson Systems was born in that moment, a specialized firm for advanced manufacturing systems. As I drove home that night, one thought stayed with me. North Point's betrayal was the best thing that could have happened. They kicked me out of a comfortable cage and forced me into something greater. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't punishment. It's power. It's freedom. It's succeeding so thoroughly that your enemies can only watch. 6 months later, I was sitting in the conference room of Richardson Systems' new office building, watching David Kim fidget across the mahogany table. The irony was delicious. The man who'd been brought in to replace me was now trying to convince me to expand my services to include training for TechFlow's other clients. Your FlexCore system has exceeded all performance metrics, he admitted, his earlier arrogance replaced by professional humility. Our other manufacturing clients are requesting similar implementations. I leaned back in my leather chair, considering his proposal. Richardson Systems had grown beyond my wildest expectations. We now held licensing agreements with 12 different manufacturing companies. And FlexCore 3.0 was generating revenue streams I'd never imagined possible. TechFlow wants to become a reseller for FlexCore? I asked. David nodded eagerly. A strategic partnership. We handle sales and customer relations. You provide the technology and implementation support. It was tempting. TechFlow had connections throughout the industry, connections that would take me years to develop independently. But I'd learned valuable lessons about the importance of controlling my own destiny. I appreciate the offer, David, I said. But Richardson Systems works directly with clients. We find that approach ensures better outcomes for everyone involved. The disappointment on his face was evident, but he'd learned not to push. Our interactions over the past 6 months had taught him that I was no longer the accommodating employee he'd expected to replace. After David left, I walked to the window of my corner office and looked out over the city. The view was spectacular. Downtown skyscrapers, the river winding through the urban landscape, and in the distance, the industrial district where North Point Industries continue to operate under our licensing agreement. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, now my VP of Operations. Portland project signed. 3-year deal. Full implementation. We'll need to hire 2 more engineers. Richardson Systems was becoming exactly what I'd envisioned. A company that solved complex problems for clients who appreciated sophisticated solutions. We didn't compete on price. We competed on results. And our results spoke for themselves. The expansion had required careful planning. I'd leveraged the North Point licensing fees to fund development of FlexCore 3.0. Then use that system to attract new clients. Each success built credibility, and each door opened to something bigger. We'd also learned from my experience with North Point. Every client contract now included clear intellectual property protections, detailed service level agreements, termination clauses that protected our interests. I'd never again find myself in a position where someone else controlled my professional fate. My assistant knocked on the door. "Alex, you have a call on line 2. Marcus Chen from North Point." I picked up the phone, curious. Marcus and I had maintained a cordial but distant relationship since the contract negotiations. "Marcus, what can I do for you?" "Alex, I wanted to give you a heads up. Jennifer Walsh submitted her resignation this morning." That was unexpected. "Really? Where's she going?" "Corporate consulting. Apparently she's been offered a position with a firm that specializes in operational efficiency." I almost laughed. Jennifer Walsh, the woman who'd orchestrated my departure to save money, was leaving for a higher-paying job with the kind of consulting firm she used to hire to evaluate North Point's operations. "What about her replacement?" I asked. "That's actually why I'm calling. The board wants to bring you back as CTO. Full equity package. Complete autonomy over technology decisions." I was quiet for a long time, processing the offer. 6 months ago, such a proposal would have been everything I wanted. Job security, recognition, the resources of an established company. Now, it felt like a step backward. "Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but Richardson Systems has commitments to multiple clients. I can't abandon those relationships." "What if we made it worth your while? Significant salary increase, consulting fees for your other work. Whatever it takes." "It's not about money," I said, and realized I meant it. "It's about building something that belongs to me." After I hung up, I spent some time thinking about the path that had brought me here. The betrayal that had once seemed so devastating had actually freed me from limitations I hadn't even recognized. Working for North Point, I'd been solving their problems, with their resources, under their direction. Now, I was solving industry-wide problems, with my resources, under my direction. The difference was profound. My phone rang again. A potential client from Germany, interested in licensing FlexCore for an automotive manufacturing facility. As we discussed their requirements, I found myself sketching ideas for FlexCore 4.0, a system that would incorporate artificial intelligence and predictive analytics in ways that current technology was just beginning to make possible. That evening, I drove out to Miller's Lake, the same spot where I'd once contemplated my future. 6 months earlier. The water was dark and still, reflecting the stars just becoming visible in the twilight sky. I thought about the choices that had led me here. The decision to license FlexCore rather than sell it outright. The careful documentation of intellectual property rights. The preparation and patience that allowed me to turn crisis into opportunity. Most importantly, I thought about the people who joined me on this journey. Sarah, Mike, Jennifer, and the other engineers we'd recruited. They'd taken risks, leaving established positions to join a startup consulting firm. Their trust and expertise had been essential to our success. My phone buzzed, an email from our accountant. Second quarter revenues were up 40% from the previous quarter. We were profitable, growing, and building something sustainable. I smiled, remembering Jennifer Walsh's confident assertion that my position could be outsourced to save money. She'd been right in a way. My position at North Point had been eliminated, but the value I created hadn't disappeared. It had simply moved to where it was properly appreciated and fairly compensated. As I drove home, I passed the North Point facility. The lights were on in the production areas. I knew that FlexCore was running smoothly, managing processes, optimizing efficiency, just as it had been designed to do. The difference was, now, that innovation was properly valued. And instead of being dependent on corporate politics and budget constraints, my future was in my own hands. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's getting ahead. The invitation arrived on letterhead that made me smile. North Point Industries cordially invites you to our annual Innovation Awards ceremony. Below that, in smaller text, recognizing 5 years of partnership with Richardson Systems. I set the invitation aside and returned to the document I'd been reviewing. A proposal from a Japanese conglomerate interested in licensing FlexCore for their entire Pacific Rim operation. It would be our largest deal to date, potentially worth $20 million over 7 years. Richardson Systems now occupied an entire floor of downtown's newest office building. We employed 32 people across engineering, sales, and support divisions. FlexCore 4.0 was running in manufacturing facilities across 4 continents, and development had begun on the next generation system. The irony wasn't lost on me. North Point's attempt to reduce costs by eliminating my position had created a business empire worth far more than they'd ever paid me as an employee. Their betrayal had been the catalyst for success beyond anything I could have achieved within their corporate structure. My assistant knocked on my door. "Alex, Marcus Chen is here for your 3 p.m. meeting." Marcus entered looking better than he had in years. The stress lines around his eyes had faded, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd learned to navigate corporate politics successfully. "Congratulations on the Japanese deal," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "That's going to be huge for you." "Thanks. How did you hear about it?" Industry connections. Word travels fast when Richardson Systems is involved in negotiations. We spent a few minutes discussing business developments. Then Marcus shifted to the real purpose of his visit. "Alex, I wanted to talk to you about succession planning." I raised an eyebrow. "Whose succession?" "Mine. I'm planning to retire in 2 years, and the board's been discussing leadership transition. Your name keeps coming up." This wasn't entirely unexpected. Over the past 5 years, I'd maintained a cordial relationship with North Point's leadership, and my consulting work had contributed significantly to their continued success. But the idea of returning to corporate employment felt strange after years of independence. "I'm flattered," But Richardson Systems requires my full attention. What if it didn't have to be an either-or situation? What if North Point acquired Richardson Systems as a wholly owned subsidiary? You'd become CEO, maintain complete operational control, but have access to North Point's resources and distribution network. It was an interesting proposal. North Point's acquisition would provide the capital and infrastructure to accelerate Richardson Systems' growth dramatically. We could expand into new markets, develop more sophisticated systems, and compete with the largest players in the industry.